Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers of the 15th India PR and Corporate Communications Awards for allowing me this opportunity to address you, my esteemed colleagues, on the topic of data led communications and its relevance in today's evolving communication landscape. I want to start by first mentioning how technology has improved our lives and connectivity. For example, I'm now able to connect with you for more than 4,000 kilometers away in Singapore. When I first started my career, international conference calls meant dialing an IDD number, inputting, hopefully correctly, a 10-digit passcode, and then huddling around a conference call speakerphone to try and understand what the person on the other end was trying to say. I hope today, 10 years on, I am much clearer and hopefully in high resolution. Which brings me to the topic of today, which is data. You see, what analog transmissions via the telephone used to do is now being quickly replaced by digital bits that are being sent all around the internet. And the beauty of this is that we can now capture, store, and study these bits, data, in a way that will inform our use of communication and the campaigns we run. So ahead of this, I did some research into the topic of data in communications because it's not exactly a new topic, right? In fact, going back just 10 years ago, I found a heap of mentions about how important data was going to be for the future of communication. Now, note this, we are now in the future. This was 2014, 2015, 2016. And I've got some choice stats to share with you. So, firstly, in 2014, 25% of global CCOs reported that they were hiring big data analysts for their teams. In 2016, the Communications Monitor in Europe found in a survey of CCOs that 72.3% believed big data would revolutionize communication. However, by 2020, it was clear that there were still gaps, even after 6 years. In Asia, a study found that 78% of PR practitioners said data competence was important, but only 45% of those same practitioners rated themselves as competent with data. And another study in US and Canada found that only 40% of PR practitioners found that they had data competency. So I think we're kind of familiar with this story, right? We all know using data is great for communications, but beyond the basics, for example, deploying media monitoring or a social media monitoring tool, why has it been so difficult for us to extract more out of data that's all around us? So let me ask you to join me in a simple exercise. If you had to choose between a hunch and a headline that was backed by data, which would you trust to lead your next campaign? The hunch or the data? I think many of you would want to say, of course, data. But let's be honest, oftentimes when push comes to shove, for example, in a crisis, right, we often fall back to what we know, our instincts and the hunch that we get. Now, that's not wrong because a lot of us build our instincts and our know how over many years of experience, and that itself is data that we have collected and internalized in order to make those decisions well. But supposing you wanted your institution to get stronger and better and be more aware of the data and the information that the world is presenting to us itself now, right? How can we put a system in place that help us make decision much more quickly and confidently? Data-led communications is not just a new buzzword. My colleagues, it is a fundamental shift in how we operate. For me, this means we need to think about a radical retooling of our communications apparatus so that data forms the foundation. In fact, every communications organization needs to ask itself, what is the core data we are using to make decisions around our storytelling? And how are we collecting, storing, accessing, and using this data? A lot of times I've heard of clients and other PR practitioners really thinking that, well, collecting data just means I need to ensure I pay for the right tool. I get my data team to be using that tool and to create reports for me. And many times that's correct. That's the great first step, right? but it sort of simplifies what a true data infrastructure can do. And I just want to make the point that data actually is very hard work. And I'm sure many of you in the audience already know that, right? Setting up a true data infrastructure involves thinking about where do I get my data from? How will I collect it? What kind of data I'll collect? And how do I put it to great use in my organization? And for that, there is a part that is technology. What are the tools I buy? Where do I deploy it? How will people access this? How often will it be shared? And then there's the part that is really about organizational change and just retooling our workflow in order to incorporate data into every decision that we are making. So I have four T's to share about data, right? And I just want to sort of simplify this with for you into these four T's. The first T is tooling. And I think this is the most important T. Oftentimes, when we are talking to our clients, it's really about what are the tools that we have and how have we tooled them to be able to be used by the organization and everyone in the organization, right? This is about setting your data infrastructure right. As seasoned PR pros, I'm sure all of us has done media monitoring before, right? I remember when I was a junior uh, at a PR at my first PR firm, my job was to look through every morning 20 newspapers, search for mentions for eight of our different clients, and clip those mentions, right, and then share them in a consolidated format by 11 a.m., which meant I had to wake up really early, get to office, and sit by the scanner because scanning speeds at that point of time were really, really slow. Today, most of us just deploy a tool, right? Whether you choose Meltwater, Cision, or Thoughtwalker, or any of the other tools, right? And we even get automated reports, and we use that by sending it onward. But really, is that all there is to it? In fact, many of these tools can be used in a much richer way or combined to even create an even better data infrastructure for you. And I've not even mentioned how AI is now being implemented to be able to extract data at a faster rate. So tooling is really about what are the strategic decisions you will make about the kind of data that you will collect. Most of us collect mentions about our company, but do we break down those mentions by topic? Do we now then organize them by the amount of times our spokespeople appeared? Do we put them in a very easily accessible data set that then can be further analyzed, and historically we can look back at it again when we need to and get more insight from it? Do we track other forms of data? Do we track our audience data? What is the audience that we have defined as our target audience? What else are they listening to? Do we track competitor data? What new spaces are they exploring and entering? If we are, how are we using this beyond just measuring, oh, we've got a 50% share of voice against our closest competitor? Tooling is really about thinking through all these questions, setting it up right, and having a reason for why each data point is being tracked, and then deploying the right technology to track that. If tooling is the core, then the next T is actually where we start to bring it to life, which is targeting. I'll just repeat that second T is targeting. And a lot of times we think about the data that is now currently available. We have so much rich data that enables us to really understand the people we are trying to reach, right? Many of us work with different brands, and for some of us, it could be a B2B brand, or another group of us, it might be a B2C brand, it might be consumers. And even within consumers, there are many different niches in consumers that we're trying to target. A lot of us in communication spend time collecting, as I mentioned before, media monitoring data. But how much of us actually spend also that same amount of investment into looking at targeting data and trying to use targeting data to understand our audiences better, to be able to tailor, number one, select the right channels to engage with them. Number two, look at what are the right themes and topics to speak to them about. And number three, really when it comes to executing our message, what is the right execution to be able to persuade or convince our target audience about the messages that we want to share with them, right? So there's so many opportunities for us to be able to use data to move away from carpet bombing media lists, to be able to use data to better understand our target audience. And indeed, what the data might even reveal is that it is not a press release or a media story that is going to move the needle in changing audience behavior, but really a much more direct to audience engagement piece. The third T is telling, and that's short form for storytelling. A lot of us draft messaging. Almost every day I'm writing a statement or something, or reviewing a document that actually is are the messages and stories our clients want to tell. And one of the best use cases for data that I've seen used or that we've used recently has been just to explore white spaces, right? We call this white space analysis, where we look at how much stories are being out there and what different categories and topics they cover that are relevant to a certain client, and what are the areas that our client could talk about but are not being well covered or well but there is a discernible demand of people asking or searching up those topics. And by looking at search data, by looking at topical and conversational data, by looking at what journalists are writing, we're able to amalgamate and draw a Venn diagram that sort of says, well, here are all the stories that are very well covered. Everybody's jumping on this bandwagon. But here, people are looking for sources and data or expert point of view around this topic, but no one's giving it. That's an opportunity. That's a white space for us to go in and provide something really compelling. But there are many other uses of how data can help us tell our story better, right? For example, another tool that we use is really about story framing, right? Trying to understand and contextualize data with our target audience data to be able to understand how do we pull some levers to help our audience understand us better. Not everyone understands information in the same way. And by really using some data points and really looking at what are certain attributes of our target audience, we're able to then tailor messages to frame that for our audiences in a way that's most effective. Finally, I want to talk about the last T, which is tracking. Tracking is something that you are all familiar with, I'm sure, right? We use data to help us track results, to understand success drivers, and finally to shape our actions moving forward. However, I do want to challenge one more thing and add one more thought to your mind, which is while you're tracking, what happens to all those great reports that you put together? I remember, again, going back to my days as an AE, I used to create multiple media clipping reports. Some of them were this thick. It's about 5 inches if you can't tell from the video, right? And it literally 350 pages of article clippings, most of them the mentions from my client, but some of it from competitors as well as industry mentions, right? And most of the time, my client at that point of time would have these books on a shelf, and there was a book for every month, and we were proud of those books. But I wonder how useful were those books other than in the immediate month to track and show to management, well, we did a lot of work. Today, tracking is something that is much more dynamic. Think of it as a living and breathing organism. And one thing I would encourage all our clients to do is start thinking about a tracking database. So media monitoring doesn't just go into a black hole, into an email and end up there once and for all, but to feed all the stories we're collecting into a living and breathing database to be able to extract relevant data. The other thing I want to say is a lot of us have not thought very deeply about organizing the database. I still see many of the same formats when I look at some of the things that we work with clients on. And what we are trying to get our clients to do is to evolve the way they look at the data points and to start turning those data points into what we call organized data points that allow us and potentially in the future AI to analyze the data that we've collected much better. So the bottom line is, if we really want to use data, it is very useful and very rewarding to invest the time to set it up right. I hope my short sharing has inspired you to now take a second look at the way that you're using your data today. It's a fast evolving landscape. Technology is changing every day. There are a lot of new possibilities. But what I've realized and observed is that in communication, we tend to get stuck and comfortable with one way of doing things and not evolve with what technology allows us to evolve. But I would like to encourage you and hopefully have inspired you to say that if you look at data more closely and the data that's now available for us to collect, and indeed maybe you already are collecting and investing into it and spending the time to understand it and tooling it to work better for you and much faster, I just want to say magic can happen. Thank you, and I wish you a great rest of the conference ahead.